Hey everybody, Joe Payne here with Political Pain with another installment where today I'd like to talk about congressional Democrats and what they are and are not doing to help the American people kind of weather the storm of the coronavirus and some of the failures to effectively negotiate with the Republican Party. So since the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, we have seen a few bills go through Congress. Two have been approved. One is in the works right now, the HEROES Act. But before that, we had the CARES Act and the Small Business Relief Bill. So the CARES Act had tons of bailout for corporate America. We're talking airlines, cruise ships, corporate America. That's definitely what the Republicans wanted and what they wanted to see. There was relief for banks, but the Democratic Party was able to push for extensions to unemployment, the direct relief where everybody who makes under a certain amount of money a year gets $1,200 immediately. And so that was definitely a good thing to get in the CARES Act early. But even then, lots of Americans are falling through the cracks, Americans who are struggling. The next bill, the Small Business Recovery Bill, that sent a lot of money to small businesses in America. There's the Paycheck Protection Program. But even then, we saw lots of what we would consider big corporations with multiple chain restaurants. I think Ruth's Chris was one of them, a kind of a high-end steakhouse. A lot of these big companies were shamed into giving the money back after it was found out that they were getting millions and tens of millions of dollars sometimes under the guise of being a small business. The big win that the Democratic Party thought they got from the small business stimulus bill was increased money and resources to hospitals for PPE and equipment and support that could help them with responding to the virus. So basically, there really was no way that the Republican Party wouldn't include those types of support for hospitals, for frontline workers, for healthcare workers. It was seen as kind of a no-brainer. So this is an example of House leadership basically starting in the middle with negotiations. And so now we get to the HEROES Act, which is a bill that includes support for municipalities. It includes a lot of stuff. That's the thing. Now that the Democratic Party in the House, led by Nancy Pelosi, have given the Republican Party everything they basically wanted in the corporate bailouts, now we see that in the HEROES Act, they've waited till now to throw in everything they possibly could think of. Support for municipalities, stimulus payments, all kinds of stuff that the Republican Party now has no incentive to even allow. Mitch McConnell has even signaled that pretty much this bill is DOA, dead on arrival. The Republicans have made it clear that this bill isn't going to get anywhere near the president's desk without chopping a bunch of stuff out of it. And this was kind of the plan all along. They knew if they could, in the heat of the crisis, they could get what they wanted and push support for the things they didn't want to give further down the road, like increased stimulus checks or support for city and state governments. Mitch McConnell even said he thought states should file for bankruptcy, which is just ludicrous. So this shows a general lack of awareness about how the Republican Party operates, how they're good at getting what they want, and it illustrates how the Democrats really don't play hardball with the Republican Party. They're more concerned with making kind of symbolic gestures, and they've now resorted to calling the HEROES Act a messaging bill. They know it's not going to get through, and so they're just saying that it's to send a message that this is what we're trying to do, but the Republicans won't let us do it. What makes that really troublesome with the HEROES Act is it's a huge bill. It's more than 1,000 pages long. It even the description, the pre-description of the bill is like 90 pages, and there's so many different things thrown in there, and many things which are not at all progressive. They're actually exactly what the Republicans would want. Things like the Federal Reserve loans to large owners of rental apartments, things that the Republicans probably want. But if you're trying to send a message that you're trying to help the American people with this bill, why would you include things like that in it. Another thing is the SALT deduction, which is a state and local tax deduction that really benefits most high-earning people in blue states, people that were punished by the Trump tax cuts, but really probably aren't doing any worse, more or less, right now from the current crisis. In fact, we just heard from the chairman of the Federal Reserve that 40% of households in the U.S. earning less than $40,000 a year have lost their jobs. So that's who's suffering right now. That's who needs direct relief. That's who needs help. It's not people who already make a good amount of money and they want to get their SALT deduction back. It's the working people. This is who needs help. And if House Democrats wanted to message that effectively, they would have this bill really focused on helping those people, helping city and state governments, and helping the little guy, not helping big apartment rental agencies, not helping high earners in blue states who got screwed over by Trump's tax cuts. That's what would be an effective message. I think it's important to talk too a little bit about Nancy Pelosi and her generation of Democrats. It's interesting. I'm an independent journalist here on YouTube. It's kind of a thing for so-called YouTube journalists to really just hate the Democrats, hate Nancy Pelosi, claim their objective, but really not offer anything constructive, but just attack the Democratic Party. There's also a lot of misogyny that goes on with attacking Nancy Pelosi. I don't want any part in that, but what I do want to talk about is the generation that Nancy Pelosi comes from. And it's not anything to do with her age. I'm talking about the political generation that she comes from. Pelosi came to the Congress in 1987 during the Reagan years. This was at the height of the rise of American neoliberalism, which generally favors the private market doing the government's job since the progressive era of FDR and on into the 60s. We're talking deregulation, we're talking cutting taxes, more freedom for the rich and corporations, less freedom for the American worker, less protections for the American worker. And really because there was such a strong conservative Republican shift in the 80s, the Democrats of that time, they really had to tack right to survive. So that's where we have this idea of pro-corporate Democrats. There really are neoliberal Democrats kind of in the center rather than to the left. That's why somebody like Bernie Sanders comes along, who is an independent and a leftist, and is seen as attacking the party, and you see the party really organize against somebody like that to keep them from pulling the party to the left. So Democrats of this era are used to being in the middle, acquiescing to Republicans, giving the Republicans what they want, meeting in the middle over pro-corporate, free trade agreements, NAFTA, legislation like that. That really helps the corporate establishment and corporate America, which, it should be pointed out, makes up a big part of the donor base of both Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate. So because of this, the Democratic Party leadership, like Pelosi, is very averse and allergic to any kind of broad or progressive legislation. That's why you don't see establishment Democrats like Nancy Pelosi supporting Medicare for all. Joe Biden famously did not support Medicare for all throughout the primary. And even now, Democratic leadership in the House in these bills is trying to support an expansion of Cobra, which is an insurance program that you can enter that continues your insurance from your previous employer if you've lost your job. Anybody who knows anything about Cobra, who's dealt with it at all, knows how incredibly expensive that it is, because now you not just have to cover what you paid for your insurance, but what your employer paid for your insurance now that you're out of a job. We're talking more than $1,000 a month for most people. It's just ludicrous to expect that that's an acceptable amount of relief for people who are struggling out of work during a pandemic. People who can't afford health care are now expected to pay much more than they were used to paying before that. So this is what's frustrating for people who expect the Democratic Party to do something, anything for the working class in America, especially when the response to the crisis has become so politicized. The Republican Party, Donald Trump, are pushing for the economy to reopen, sending workers back into harm's way, without adequate protection. They're even trying to remove liability from corporations. So if you work for a company and you get sick because they didn't provide you any masks, they didn't even put plexiglass up, at the check stand or whatever else protections they could have offered you, they're not liable if you get sick and you get injured because of the coronavirus. It kind of contributes to this thing I've heard my whole life, following politics and trying to stay informed. And when I talk to people I know, friends, family, who say, oh, geez, well, I just don't vote because what does it matter? Whatever changes. Doesn't matter which side you elect, things just stay the same. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true. I'm going to have another video coming up to explain why I think the Trump administration and President Donald Trump have made this crisis much, much worse. But I understand people's perception, why they would think that it doesn't matter who you elect, because we see time and time again the Democratic Party acquiescing, already meeting in the middle with the Republican Party, not really pushing for anything bold because they're too afraid to do that. They think that they can get more voters from the center and from the Republican Party than they could if they actually inspired more voters to get out to the polls because they actually saw them doing something for regular, everyday working people. So that's just a bit of my analysis of what's going on in Congress right now. It can seem frustrating because Congress is so back and forth with legislation. It goes to the House, it goes to the Senate. This person says that person says this. But on top of all this, you also have the messaging war that's going on between Democrats and Republicans. And I personally see Nancy Pelosi just failing miserably at certain key moments, like, for instance, opening up her freezer on a late night show to show all the gourmet ice cream she's enjoying while Congress was on a long recess. The House actually extended its recess in the middle of this crisis because it just wasn't safe. Now they finally approved remote voting where people can do proxy voting if they feel it's not safe. Maybe they're older, have health conditions. We're talking about House members who can designate someone to vote for them. That's historic. But again, it took months for us to get to this point. The other thing Nancy Pelosi did, which I think was kind of goofy and odd, was she recently was asked about Donald Trump saying he's taking hydroxychloroquine and took the opportunity to call him fat, call him morbidly obese. It kind of just shows a tone deafness if you will make a statement like that to kind of burn Donald Trump, but you won't push for progressive legislation that might help people. It's kind of like when she tore up Trump's State of the Union speech just after he made it, but just the week before, maybe in that same week, had voted to approve his bloated military budget. So I hope this helps you understand a bit of the back and forth in Congress and some of the motivations of why it goes on this way and why the Democratic Party, I think I saw an Onion headline that once, said they were afraid to lose their image as spineless and ineffectual. So, sometimes the Onion will hit it right on the nose. So check out the Onion if you don't know about that. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of Political Pain today. Tried to dive into a bit of what's going on, help keep you informed, help see through kind of all the different headlines. I hope to offer more critique and analysis of, the political process, but also the media in the future. So if you like what I'm doing here, please please subscribe, please hit the bell, do whatever you can to keep me on your timeline. Check out my website, politicalpain.com, and see my blog posts there so we can stay connected and stay safe and informed during these wild and crazy times. So thanks again for watching, everybody.